Earlier today, I saw two chairs out on the side of someone's curb, and I thought to myself that those are some nice chairs. I could probably redo them. So if they're still there, when hubby got home with the truck, I was gonna go get them. And guess what, guys? They're still there. Totally about to snag those. Ready to give up. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel, and if you can see what's behind me, you can kind of guess what's going on here. So a couple of weeks ago, I was just driving along and I saw somebody was throwing something out on the curb. That's right, they were throwing this in the trash. I took a mental note of that and was like, I'm in the car right now. There's no way I'm gonna fit these two chairs in my small sedan. Plus I had the kids because I was on my way back from Carline. So I was a little sad and like, oh, what a missed opportunity. Then we ate dinner, hubby came home, he had his truck, and I was like, I'm gonna borrow your truck real quick and I'm gonna drive over there and see if those are still there. Well, they were. You guys, this is the most exciting find and makeover I've done so far. I went to the store. So we're back from Hobby Lobby. I found some flowers. They were 50% off on the florals. So I kind of created this little bouquet that I want to put up in my room. So there's that. We got our fabric, so you can see the price. $25.47 is what I'm paying for that. So I found these were half off, so I got two of these, which will be for the back panel of the chair. We've got the fabric of our choice here, as well as a bunch of the little nail head trims. So we'll add all that up and show you guys. I bought 2.5 yards of fabric, which worked out perfectly. That ran me about 25 bucks, and then I purchased a little bit of the foam backing. They were on sale 50% off, and so it came with two of them, and I got two of those pieces, so that came out to like $3. And then if you consider some of the nail head trim, these were $2.49 a pack. I've used 1.5 per chair, so you can get away with about 3, but I recommend having more than enough in case some bust or bend. So say 4 packs of those, that's $2.49 times 4, you're looking at about 10 bucks there. So I'd say overall this project is probably running about $38. I mean, that's if you have a hot glue gun, that's if you have a staple gun, and that's if you have a sewing machine. Now I happen to already have piping stuff to make my own piping, but if you don't, what you could do is recycle what came on the chair that you already had, which the people who had this chair prior to me, the previous owners, must have done a makeover or bought it made over, because the piping in between the seats there had previously been used twice. I saw 2 different fabrics on that, which was really cool, so that kind of let me know that this had been through multiple makeovers, and so I'm not the first one to give these chairs a fresh new life. I mean, I'm gonna show you guys before what it looked like. You'll see me ripping it apart. You're gonna see that whole process of me gutting it, figuring out how I'm gonna go about redoing this. And what I recommend there is, as you're undoing it and taking it apart, keep track of the steps, because you're gonna do that in reverse. Basically, the outermost layer was the last thing that was done, or the last steps, the final details or finishing touches. And so as you're undoing that, what you're gonna get to are those layers or steps. And so the undermost or innermost layer was the first step. It's what they did first. And so I kind of did that whole reverse, taking off, putting on, whatever you want to do to decide or determine how I was going to go about refinishing these or reupholstering. So I went ahead yesterday and I took apart most of it, got all the old fabric off of it. I had to go ahead and make an executive decision to paint these black. I was going to ask you guys if you wanted me to stain them or paint them, but I ran into a little hiccup while I was trying to get the old paint off. It was done multiple times apparently, and then there was spray paint laid over it, and so I thought that I could use some thinner, put it on there. I tried leaving it on for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 4 hours, and it still wasn't coming off. So what I decided to do was just sand it down very well
and then paint it with some black chalkboard paint.
And then yesterday I spent the day making some of the piping and doing the fourth coat. So I will do touch-ups if I see any spots while we're in different lighting. But I did some piping. I did it 2 layered in case I would need to fold it over like this. So as you can see, that's what a 2 layered piping would look like, which is a nice detail. Or I could cut it up down the middle and have just 1. So it just depends on what I'm going to need. So I did 2 full long rows of that, hopefully, which is long enough to go around the whole chair.
In order to make the piping, what I did is I took some of the fabric that I had purchased and I cut just a tiny strip off of the end of it, about 3 inches, possibly 4, and then I took some of the piping which I had already purchased, or you can recycle old piping, and you just wrap the new fabric around it and then sew up a seam as close to the piping as you can. You're just kind of tucking it in and sewing up. And then I also took another strip up the other side, folded it over to get a 2-layered piping type of situation, because I just think I would want a thicker piping for the detail on this particular chair.
So I'm more than ready to get started on this. I have been unable to sleep thinking about it, so let's just get down to business. I'm going to start by taking some of this and laying it here and doing a rough over measure of what I'm going to need. And then I'm going to probably double that over because I need 2 pieces.
Okay, so first things first, all I'm doing here is I'm taking an approximate square measure of the amount of fabric that I'll need to cover the seat base, and then I'm folding that over to make 2 pieces, 1 for each chair. Every cut that I'm making it times 2 so that I can pre-cut all of the things for the separate chair. As you'll notice here, I am in 2 different outfits because this is 2 different days. I did 1 day to do the first chair to get all of my cuts and all of my prep work done and ready to go and figure out how I needed to go about this, and then the second day is kind of me reiterating the steps that I took and kind of going a little bit more in detail and showing close up and figuring out things that I kind of could do better the second time, tweaking the mistakes or just making it easier or better or more efficient. So that's what you're going to see here. I'm cutting up the strips to get the 2 seat bases, and then I need 3 panels for the back side. 2 of them are the same size. Those are the 2 side panels, the left and the right. And so I just did 2 kind of like rectangular squares to cover that, and then 1 longer rectangle for the farthest back center piece. And so you'll see that in just a moment. So as I did that, I also just folded over and made those cuts twice again, so I have this fabric already for the next seat. Then what I did is I put the base seat fabric on it, and then I started stapling it as close to that little edge but not over the lip where that piping was before, and I'm just stapling right up into that little gap, and then I will cut off the excess. Around the little arms, what I did is I stapled down the edge, and then I took my scissors and cut off any extra fabric. I made sure to also fold over and give it that nice little detail in the front here, just like there was on the old set of chairs, which if you're not following along, you might want to go back and watch the first video or the prep video of these chairs when I got them, how I gutted them, all the treatments that I did to them, and the sanding and all of that. I also explained the undoing process and how I was going to go back and redo it. And so there was a lot of tips in there and a lot of kind of things you might have missed that I might be referring to in this video that if you didn't watch that video you might not understand. So it is linked below, and I will put a link somewhere else for you if you want to go watch it. It's also on my channel. In just a moment, I'll pop up on the screen some timestamps for you. The first timestamp will be the second chair that I'm working on, where I go into fuller detail and show you more up close of what I'm doing each step of the way. And then the second timestamp will just be the end if you're just looking to see the finished result. Now it's up to you whether or not you want to speed up the time here or slow it down and kind of see what I'm doing. I left this footage in because I wanted you to be able to see exactly what I did. Me stapling it in, me testing out the piping to see if it was going to cover it up, make sure that I had cut enough of the fabric off of the edging as I was going around, making sure that I had enough of fabric to go around the chair of the arm of the chairs, and then all of that stuff. So I left that in just so you could see it. In a moment here, I'll get to putting on the paneling, and again, it's not going to be as detailed for this particular chair because this was the first day one of me putting the fabric on, and I was experimenting with this chair, kind of figuring out what the steps were going to be, how it's going to look, what I was going to do, if I was going to do nail head trim or piping up the center, which you guys kind of helped me with, and all of that. So I'll move on and I'll show you that again in more detail in the second part. But for now, go ahead and get comfortable, get your coffee or popcorn or sandwich or whatever ready, and you can go ahead and watch me put on the paneling along the back here. You'll want to make sure that you have the good facing portion of the fabric facing outward, which I'll show you in more detail in the second chair later, but I just wanted you to know that as I'm putting it on, I'm putting that part facing outward because I want that to kind of be the better looking or more finished portion on the outside. That's what you would see. I don't want anything to be unfinished looking. So having said that, I put that on, and then it's going to be time to move on to putting on the foam. So I just stapled the fabric along the edge here and just covered up any of the old blemishes that there were. And then once I cut the foam out, again, I cut enough foam for both the chair that I'm working on today and then the second chair. I just kind of winged it on the foam sizes for the side panels. I just kind of cut it out and made sure that it fit in there because it doesn't need to be really perfect. I just didn't want it to overlap any because I didn't want there to be any creases or wrinkles underneath the fabric, so it needed to be smaller than the portion of fabric. That's my only tip there. I used some extra spare foam that I had left over from an old project, I think. So that's where this is. I think it was like a chair covering or bench covering or something that I probably just used this foam for, so I left those scraps not knowing if I would ever be able to use them, and here came a perfect time because foam can be expensive most of the time, but I found mine at Hobby Lobby this time around for the back panels. It was a 2-pack for like $6, $6.99 or something like that, and then it was 50% off, so it was like $3.50. So that was a pretty good deal. So I used one panel for one chair, one for the other chair, and then I used my scraps for the side panels because that was something that I hadn't decided on before I went to the store, or something I made the decision to do after the fact. And so once I used those scraps up and put all of that on, it was time to put the fabric over the foam, and then that's where it got a little bit more tricky because I had to do like multiple steps, like kind of like the finishing steps at the same time as applying it, and so I'll go into more detail about that and I'll show you that in just a second. So after I cut the foam and everything out, I realized I was going to have to make some more piping, so I cut a little strip of fabric out to make some more piping, and I did another round of that just to make sure that I had more than plenty in case I needed it, because I wanted to have more than enough than not enough once I cut all of the rest of the fabric up, because once the fabric with those long pieces were going to be gone, it was going to be more difficult to do piping. It's more easy to do piping on longer pieces than having to do multiple small strips, if that makes any sense. So I did those 2 steps, and then I put the fabric back on the backing portion. I cut those second covering for the back panels because I already had pre-cut the underneath panels for the backing, and now it was time to do the top finishing piece. So that was what was left of the fabric, and so I really wanted to make sure that I had enough to do that and have extra piping. So once I cut these squares out to cover up these two side panels in the backing, again I folded that over and I did it for double or twice that, one for this chair and one for the other chair, so that all of that was pre-cut to make that job much easier. So then it's time to start putting the fabric on once all that is cut, and that is where I want to really stress that it's important to put the folding edges over, put your panel details, pay attention, do what you think is right and go with your gut, but also take your time and do it slow and steady and make the decisions as you go. And what I mean by that is feel free to improvise if you need to. Like for example, I felt like I wanted to trim up a little bit more of the foam a couple of times, or I felt like I wanted to get the hot glue gun out and fold over the edges so that the edges stayed down and never frayed or anything, especially since I was going to be putting nail head trim over it. A couple of the spots I stapled down at the bottom to kind of reinforce that, so that there was never any like pushing or tension that would pull that loose if it was just the nail head trim. So I would like use the staple gun to staple it down along the bottom. I would put the foam and then I would pull it up over and use that hot glued folded up top edge that I had finished off, and then I nail head trimmed that in so that it had more reinforcement down at the bottom where I felt like most of the pressure or tension or weight would be put on it, and the top was much more finished and defined. But again, these were decisions that were made impromptu. Like as I was doing it, I was just like, these thoughts were coming to me. So that's why I didn't really talk through it or show it in much detail in this particular one, because I wasn't sure that that's what I was going to do. It wasn't until I was done. So depending on what your chair's looking like and what your needs are, you might have to make different decisions than what I did. You might want to hot glue first and staple after, or staple and then go in later with more piping. Like for instance, I decided to do a double piping versus a single piping because I really wanted to make sure there was like extra coverage in those sensitive areas. So once I was finished putting the back paneling on, like I wanted to do the side ones just the same and kind of keep it nice and cohesive and keep my spacing the same, because I was using an unorthodox way of measuring out the sides and keeping that all cohesive. I was using my fingers. I used a 3-finger distance in between each of the nail head trim to kind of get my distance there, and I really liked the way that looked, so it worked out pretty nicely. And so I went ahead and did the whole perimeter of this back portion like that, and then at the very end I went ahead and decided to put down the middle some nail head trim, and then I posted a poll on my Instagram for you guys to decide if you liked the nail head trim or the piping to go down like the vertical strips in the back center portion that kind of separates the different panels. So I let you guys vote on that, and you decided. You'll see how that turned out in the end, but I did want to go ahead and do a chair to kind of show you guys that. So that's what all is going on in all of this footage. And then don't forget, I will be showing you up close in more detail on the second chair, which is like the next day for me, so that's why it's like a different outfit. But you can either scroll forward or look for that timestamp I put in earlier, and you'll be able to skip there, or you can keep watching. Again, I'm just kind of winging these steps as I go through. Once I'm done getting the panels done on the top portion, I decided to start onto the bottom portion, and that's when I went ahead and I cut off the excess fabric that was along the perimeter of the base, and then it was time to start hot gluing on the piping that I had done. Now again, I decided to go with a double piping versus a single piping, and what I wanted to do is, since I had already sewn those together to make that easy on myself, I just took a little strip of hot glue and then folded that over so it would keep it together, and then I took that all the way down the long strip, which took forever, and then it was time to hot glue that to the actual perimeter of the chair. So I took the first part that I was working on and I folded over the edge and hot glued that down really nice and smoothly and finished looking, and then I hot glued that to a piece of the base of one of the arms of the chair, and I started that at my starting position, and then I wrapped it all the way around using the hot glue to go all the way around, and then when I got back to the point where I started at, I nicely hot glued like that and folded it under, and so that way you don't see any unfinished edges, if that makes sense. You'll see it again a little bit more up close, and then I'll zoom in and show you guys the way it looks finished at the very end also, but just to kind of give you an idea of how I was giving it this finished look. I was being thoughtful as I was putting it on, because I know that once you put the piping on, like, that is the finished detail, like you're covering up any blemishes, so that's kind of like the point of it. So I just really wanted to reiterate that. Once I was finished with that, it was time to do any touch-ups. I did the strip down the middle, and then I asked you guys to vote, so that way overnight I could get those votes in, and then it was kind of wrapping up day 1 and moving on to day 2. So in the beginning of day 2, I will show you guys the finished completed look of day 1, and then we'll go into a more detailed concept of how to reupholster these chairs from start to finish. And then of course, if you want to see all of the prep work, you'll have to go watch the previous video, but these are both going to be linked up at the same time, same day, because I'm working on them back to back. I just separated them for time. So anyways, here is moving on to day 2. Everything is so nice and so smooth and so professional looking done. Like, I am impressed with myself. As you can see here, this is so nice and smooth and flat. I'm just absolutely obsessed with this transformation. So yesterday, as I was making this one, I made sure to cut out the pieces that I would need the same of to that one, to try to make this process twice as fast, twice as easy. You know what I'm saying? So this is all the leftover scraps here, which we'll get out of the way, and we're left with this piece. Both fuzzies. Okay. So we pre-cut the base piece, which needs to be cut. This one I'm going to start out stapling the bottom here. Now, I have to get in multiple various awkward positions to staple this, and you might also find yourself having to get in some weird positions. So my back was killing me by the next day, so I just want to give you fair warning. The hot gluing, I suffered various burns from that, so be cautious. My back was killing me, which is why it took multiple days for me to do this. Plus, I was doing it right on the piggyback of doing all of the prep work, which took 4 days, 2 days of gutting and prepping the seats by trying to get all the paint off, and then 2 days of painting, 2 coats per day. That was 4 days of just prepping and getting these seats ready, and then now 2 days of actually reupholstering. So that is a total of 6 days, and then not to mention any touch-ups, and then staging and taking the final photos of it. So holy moly, guys, by the end of this I was tired. Just let me point that out. So like I mentioned yesterday and in the previous video of the prepping, I paid attention to, as this was being undone, how they had folded over the fabric on the edges and how I liked that, so I went ahead and did that. And then also to make my job easier today versus yesterday, I'm going ahead and I am folding under the pieces and or cutting the parts down towards the trim before stapling it down, because it was kind of hard to cut it so close to the perimeter where I needed to get to kind of make it look just, you know, more snug. And so then here I'm wrapping it around, tucking under the fabric, and then stapling it down, and then cutting off the excess to like right before stapling it. But I'm also cutting or folding under that little edge that's unfinished too, so that also is just more of a finished looking edge, if that makes any sense. It's just giving it more professional finished looking edges is really my goal here. And then again, any of this exposed part here that you're like, oh, that doesn't look very good, or it looks raw or whatever, that's going to get covered up later. Those blemishes get covered up later. But as you can see here, I was having a hard time kind of getting in and cutting there, so from this point on I realized, let me just start cutting off the excess before stapling it down. So I worked my way around the perimeter, and then once I got that chair finished, it's time to move on to like the back paneling. And then once I get to that back paneling portion, I really wanted to show you guys up close why it was important to put the finished part of the fabric on the outside, so that that's the part that you see, if that makes any sense. And then you also want to be mindful of like where your wood is on the back side of it, so that you're not going through it and nicking up any of the paint or work that you already did. And then keep in mind, I haven't even sealed this yet. That's something that I want to do at the end. I just figured if I needed to do any touch-ups or there were any blemishes, I would do all that, and then at the very end I would seal this in with like a nice good solid wax, so that'll protect it from getting scuffed up or anything later on. So lots of steps are going into these chairs. They are well loved, guys.
Took a little snack break, finished up doing the bottom part here, and now we're going to work on putting the back panel on here. Now what you're going to do is, instead of taking the flat side that doesn't have the print, you're going to take the good side, so that the good side is facing out, and then you're going to line it up so that it covers the whole base. Even if you have to do it crooked or however you need to do it, doesn't matter. And then you're going to start stapling in to secure it. You can cut the excess off later.
Another small or minor tip, when you're doing a project like this, if you make a mistake, keep some pliers and a small flathead screwdriver around. Those are excellent for helping to get out staples, as well as using like a piece of fabric or something like a cloth or something to help you pull it out, so that way when you're pressing against, say, the edge of the finished wood that you've just painted, it doesn't scrape that finish off. So every now and then, if I have to take something out, you'll see me use like a piece of piping or something to give myself leverage to press against the wood so it doesn't scrape it or pull it off. And I'm using like the pliers and the flathead screwdriver to pry out staples and or to pry out the nail head trim once I later on, if I mess up with a detail or something like that. So just a little tip there, throwing in random things as I see them or think about them, in case while you're working you're like, I made a mistake, how do I go about this? That's how I would, at least in this situation, go about something like that.
Wish I could get through to you, don't know what to do to you. Anything I say will come off as wrong, and you're not alone. Something feels out of place, but you have no tell. It's like we want the same things, but the lines we've drawn are too parallel. I can't sleep when you're not talking to me. Got me suffering in silence, can't breathe when you're not here.
Now, something that I used, but you don't have to, is a spray adhesive to kind of hold the foam up onto the fabric as I was applying the outer layer of the fabric on there. I just found that this was easy instead of me trying to hold it up and hold the fabric up and be mindful of all that. I did this as just like a lazy way of me not having to do that. It just stayed up on its own, and then that way I could use all of my hands to both space the fingers out of the nail head to where the next one was going, and then use my other hand with the soft mallet to tack the nail head trim in. The soft mallet I recommend using so that it doesn't damage or nick up your nail head trim, but if you can't use a soft mallet, you can take a regular hammer and wrap some cloth around it and use like a rubber band to hold it on, and that'll give you like a smooth, soft end so that you can tap those in gently. As you just saw, I was stapling the bottom portion in first before I put the foam and the nail head trim in, and that was just to give it a little bit extra reinforcement, which I discussed earlier in the first chair when I was doing that, but I wanted to reiterate it on this one in case you skipped forward and didn't catch that. So I did a little strip of the stapling at the bottom, and then I folded it upwards and did a little bit of the nail head trim along the bottom, and then did the foam and pulled it up over to do the top part. So just the steps that I'm using to kind of layer this process and give me those finished edges, but all at the same time. So I'm like doing the gut work and the finished trim all at once, if that makes sense.
Can't sleep when you're not talking to me. Got me suffering in silence. Can't breathe when you're not here. I know that you feel some type of way, girl. You don't say it to my face, though. Just say it to my face. Say it to my face. I know that you feel some type of way, girl.
Once I complete the top and the bottom portions of the nail head trim that are again spaced 3 fingers apart, I wanted to leave the sides kind of loose and open because I hadn't decided yet what it was going to be, whether it was going to be tacked in, and if it was going to be tacked in with the nail head trim, I wanted to be able to fold under the edges to give it a nice smooth finished look and then tap the nails in, or the nail head into it. But if not, and it's going to have piping on it, I can just hot glue that down and put the piping over the top of it. So you'll see what that finished look comes out to be in the end. I was just kind of giving it more time until I needed to go back and do whatever that was going to be. That was literally going to be the last detail that I did, so I knew I could just go ahead and get the rest of it done. So anyways, moving right along, you're just going to see me kind of tack it in all along the edges and do both of the sides and the back paneling. Again, I leave this footage in just so you can see the work that is being done. I also urge you to be cautious when you're using the hot glue gun so you don't burn yourself, and make sure that you have a safe place to put it so you don't burn anything like fabric or whatever. You don't want to get the hot glue to drip onto the fabric you're working on either, because that would be disastrous. It would ruin all the work that you did. So I was very careful when I was using a hot glue gun to have something underneath of it, to be cautious that it would drip down on that and not on the fabric, or to be quick and swift with like making sure I was in and out with it and not letting it drip over the top of the surface of the fabric, because that would really suck to ruin this last bit of fabric, because I didn't have any extra. I literally used down to like the last strip for piping. So just be mindful of stuff like that while you're working. So then you'll see that I tapped in the bottom around the edge, and then I worked my top around there, and then I worked along the sides, and what I did is I folded under those edges so that it wouldn't be raw, and then I took a little bit of hot glue and glued that down so it would stay in place, and then I tapped my nail head trim into it. So, I mean, lots of little details, but I feel like it's really important.
Alright, so got the hot glue gun heating up, and what we are going to do next is work on these frontal pieces here. First, I took the bigger pieces to put up front here. Strip up the middle, pinch it closed. And then you see the imperfections here that you can see. We're going to be covering that up like so. I'm going to pre-cut this one to size. Because I don't want to damage. Start with this here.
So once again with this piping, I did a double piping, so it was 2 rows of it, and so I needed to hot glue down the center. So once I did hot glue down the strip and like hold it together, it was time to work my way around the perimeter of the base. So I started at one end, cut it nice and smooth, folded it under with a little bit of hot glue to make it look nice and finished, and I started at one of the little armchairs, worked my way all the way around the perimeter. And again, this was the outermost layer, so I did the piping around the armchairs first, and then this is covering up those little unfinished ends that were down on the ends of those. So this is like the outermost layer of piping, if that makes sense. So once I got all of that completed and smooth all the way around the edge, it was up to you guys to decide what type of the little center horizontal strip in between the back panels, whether it was going to be nail head trim or the piping, and I let you guys decide, and you'll see that, and in just a few moments you'll see the full completed look, and then I'll show you guys again a little bit of the before, so to remind you what a transformation these chairs have gone through. While it has probably been one of the most back-breaking ones, it has definitely been one of the most inspiring and fun transformations that I've done. I've been really excited about these chairs. I'm actually like staring at them right now as I'm editing, just in awe, and hoping that, you know, they don't get ruined or anything, because they are just such beautiful pieces. I can't believe somebody was throwing them out. You guys, if you see good solid wood pieces like this, the possibilities are endless. It's like a little bit of paint and fabric can go a long way. So if you don't already and you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Cora's Creative Corner, and that's where I post all the polls for this stuff if you guys want to help decide the things like this, where you can help me determine whether or not we want to do this fabric or this paint or these projects for these videos or whatever for my YouTube channel. I recommend you guys go there. But anyways, this is what you guys voted, and so this is what I decided to do. I did have to go back to the other chair where I had already put in the nail head trim, and I had to remove that before putting in the piping, but I did go ahead and do the double piping here, and then I used just a nail head at the top and bottom of each one, where I tried to space that out as decently as I could, and then I hot glued the piping down the center there. And I think that actually turned out to look a lot more comfy and cozy and more inviting to sit in, and less edgy and uninviting, so to speak. So I really liked that you guys decided that, but yeah, I am so pleased with this outcome. I just want to give you guys a little tour of the final look, and then a reminder of what the old original chairs looked like when I found them in the trash on the curb.
So